Meeting.
You're all set? Okay, first question. Why don't you tell me a little bit about Dark End of the Tunnel? It's sort of a new sound, is it not?
I don't know how to answer that. I wouldn't know. I guess that would be for a listener to tell me, or maybe a Boingo fan to tell me whether it's a new sound or not. I never do anything on my albums intentionally to go, a new sound. I assume that my writing is always shifting a little and changing a little, but beyond that, it's whatever evolutionary trend seems to be happening, probably something that you may have heard gradually over the last 3 albums happening a little more on this album, I would guess. There's not one specific thing that I could say, this is our new sound, and certainly nothing conscious to do a new sound one way or the other. I never do. In fact, I never have any control over what I write one way or the other. Yeah. When I'm writing songs, I have a lot of control when I'm writing orchestra music, but when I'm writing songs, the one thing that I could be absolutely sure of is that if I sit down to write a song, I won't. So that's never failed me. I've never been able to sit down, today I'm going to write a song. I'll just sit there forever. I'll always write when I'm least expecting it. I'll write in the car when I'm driving around. I'll get ideas and finish them a month later. Very weird, sporadic, undisciplined, random type of approach to songwriting, because I always feel like I'm just tuning in some kind of like antenna for whatever inspirations I might get, and they seem to arrive in their own good time, as opposed to writing a score where I'm enormously disciplined. I have to write so many bars of music per day, whether I feel great, whether I'm sick with the flu, whether I feel inspired or not. I have to do it, and I do.
So when you're under the gun, do you think that affects your art or your craft?
Well, I think to be a successful film composer, you have to be able to work well under a lot of pressure. And I've been able to function in the pressure cooker, as it were, quite well. So I guess I'm geared for that, but writing songs, it just isn't that kind of pressure. It's all very personal. You're not looking at a picture and the picture telling you what it is to write. When I look at a movie on the screen, it's right there. I see it, I hear it in my head, and then I have to go through the laborious process of writing it all down. But when I'm writing a song, it's all stuff out of the blue.
Well, where does it come from, do you think? Do you have some idea? You tune in that little antenna.
No, not a clue. I have no idea. No idea. I've never had any idea. I don't know if any songwriter does, really.
No game plan?
No, no game plan.
Really? I just always assume that, okay, now we're going to explore this avenue. And this album, I was reading the notes, and Dark End of the Tunnel, and it was talking about not having any funk or dance music or anything like that, and I thought, gosh, is that going to be a tough sell, and is that what...
Well, but that's more just because boredom. We did a lot of fast music when we started out. The early Oingo Boingo stuff was very frenetic, and that became boring. And I started getting into more dance beats and getting a little more into my own roots. My own musical roots would tend much more towards ethnic music, and because it was interesting. In recent years, I've been getting more into melody, melodic music, some slower tempos, but again, it's not part of a game plan. It's just because if I'm bored writing one kind of music, I'll find myself shifting into other types of music. I don't like repeating myself over and over again.
How does the band deal with that, in a sense, that if you're on a musical whim, for the lack of a better word, you want to go one way, does the band always follow, or do they say, hey, what the hell are you doing? Oh, yeah, sure. I mean, if I write a number of songs, they still will be the ones that will make the song come alive or not. I'm just saying, here's a song, let's try it. When we go into record, some songs will immediately, the band will go, this is really good, we really like this one. This one we're not sure about, let's experiment with it. Let's see if we could make it happen. Some of them never will even get to be recorded. Sometimes we don't really know until we've recorded a number of songs what the mood or the tone of the album. Certainly Dark at the End of the Tunnel was that way, because I recorded 5 songs with the band before Batman, way back February, March of '89, and then we went back in the studio and recorded the rest of the album in August
of that year. And so it wasn't until we'd finished recording the next 5 songs that we went and listened to them all and didn't even realize that there was quite a dark thread going between them in terms of the subject matter and the mood and everything else, and that's what we called the dark at the end of the tunnel. But until that point, I was never even, or anybody in the band, even conscious that there was any continuity at all between the songs.
When I was telling people I was going to do this interview, a lot of people said it. Fans of yours have said, "Oh my God, he's this musical genius." Do you look at yourself as that, in that category, or are you just a...
No, of course not. Stravinsky was a genius. I'm not a genius. If I could live 3 lifetimes and carry all the musical knowledge that I'm learning as I go into each lifetime, in other words, die, start out again, and with exactly the amount of musical knowledge that I just died with, and go through that 3 times, I still wouldn't get to where he was when he was 20 years old. So that's genius. I consider myself to be hardworking. I'm very intense about my work. I put a lot of effort into what I do. So if I do anything right, I think I'm more an example of kind of the old axe to the grindstone than what one might call genius.
Do you have a musical hero then, or somebody that you said, "Oh my God, if I could be just like so-and-so"? Was there inspiration in other artists for you?
Oh, sure. I mean, so many. I wouldn't even know where to begin. I mean, early on, you know, like the one I just mentioned, Stravinsky was one of the first people who made me just stop in my tracks when I heard the music and practically pass out. It was just so incredible, and I couldn't believe it. And I knew right then and there that I'd never achieve that kind of greatness in my life. But, and sometimes that actually depresses me. I prefer not to have these heroes out there because they're so good, and I know I could never be that good, that it makes me almost want to give up. Even now, I'll put on Rites of Spring and works of Prokofiev, and there's so many others, Shostakovich, so many composers, and I'll listen to just 2 or 3 minutes of it, and I'll get incredibly depressed because I'll realize I'll never, ever get close to that kind of greatness. But then eventually I'll get over it and go, well, I may not achieve greatness, but I can achieve something, and whatever that is, I'll just make it the best I can.
A few years ago, talked with John Williams about scoring for movies, and he described with like an incredible passion the ability and the process in which he goes through to score a movie. How can you describe the process that you go through?
It's a very, I don't know if it's the same as with John. It's for me, it's very obsessive. I get very personally connected with the films, and I take it very personally when it doesn't come out well, which is a sign of not being professional, I suppose, and it may eventually be my undoing in this industry. I'm kind of a perfectionist. I really want to see the music I write for the film come out great and try to bring something fresh and original and be presented in a good way. And if it's a lousy dub, or it gets buried under sound effects, or the cue gets dropped, I really take it as an arrow straight to the heart. But I reach a point, right about the middle of the score, where if I'm writing for about 6 weeks, let's say, by week 3, I'm dreaming about the movie that I'm working on. I'm living and breathing and thinking. I start talking like characters, and it drives everybody around me crazy. And at the worst part of the whole thing, I'll feel like I'm not sleeping at night, because while I'm dreaming, I'm still working on the same cue that I was working on for the 12 hours previously to going to sleep. And that gets pretty intense, because sometimes I don't feel like I'm ever turning it off. And before I go to sleep, I'll try to listen to all kinds of, any kind of records, things, different kinds of music. I'll watch stupid television shows. I'll be desperate for late night, 2, 3 in the morning. Sometimes you'll turn on to Leave It to Beaver or anything like that, something to drive the music out of my head so I can go to sleep. But it gets very intense. I think any good film composer has to feel passionate about one's work and has to feel passionate about film. I think many other composers, film composers, I have to say, because composer and film composer are two different things. But I was raised on movies. I grew up around the block from a movie theater that played movies for kids. I never saw an adult in that theater. And I would sit through movies 5, 6, 7 times if I liked it. I saw The Time Machine 9 times. And, I mean, I would sit through it 3 times on a Saturday and sit through it 3 more times on a Sunday, and if it played the following weekend, I'd go again. So I've always loved film. I always dreamed that maybe I would work in the medium of film, although I never thought music. That was the big surprise. I thought maybe I would be an editor, special effects, cinematography. All of these things appealed to me. I never thought I had any musical talent. So the biggest surprise in my life is that after many years of working in all these different things, theater and then rock and roll, I eventually did come back to film through orchestral music, which was the last area that I thought I would ever have a chance to get involved in. So, but on the other hand, it felt like I was making a complete circle when I got into film composition, because that was my first love. That was my great inspiration. Even when I was 14, 15 years old, I was infatuated with film score as well as film. I realized that about 6 out of my 7 favorite films had the same film composer, which was Bernard Herrmann, and all of those wonderful fantasy films that I grew up. Journey to the Center of the Earth, The 7 Voyages of Sinbad, Jason and the Argonauts. They all had these wonderful Bernard Herrmann scores, and that made me aware when I was very young how important music was in film. Although I didn't think that I would get a chance to do it, I was always very awed by how a good score can really make a film come alive. Even to this very day, I go back and look at those movies, and the music really adds such an enormous amount to the movies. Day the Earth Stood Still, to me, still one of the great film scores of the last 50 years.
So often people take for granted, in a sense, you know, you go to see Jaws, for instance, and you go, dun, 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 and it just becomes so much, an integral part of the movie-going experience, but people take it for granted that, and you see the film without anything, no sound, no anything, and you've got to create the mood. And I read where you were quoted as saying that some of the action things, writes its own music.
Well, I'll see certain things happen, and I'll just hear it immediately. If the movie is very visual, which is probably why I've done well with Tim Burton and his movies, is because they're visual, and I respond visually. I can't read a script and hear a score, but Tim flew me out to London, and I saw 5 minutes of Gotham City on the screen of when they were only about half done shooting Batman, and I heard the Batman theme right there on the spot, and I was already singing notes into the tape recorder. Sitting there, I was hunched down real low in front of this little screening room, singing all these notes and saying all these things, and they probably wondering what I was doing, so I was like mumbling to myself. And but before I reached, you know, I flew home the next day, and before I landed on American soil, I already had sketched out in my mind the tone of the movie musically.
Do you have a favorite project you've worked on? I mean, you've done so many high-profile movies. Do you have a favorite that was just such a wonderful experience? Oh,
it's hard to say. Beetlejuice will always be one of my favorite film experiences because there wasn't a lot of pressure on the film. It wasn't a big budget movie. I don't think the film company had high expectations for it. In fact, I think everybody everywhere pretty much expected it to flop. And so it was really an underdog. And I got to really let my imagination run wild in a kind of a fun way with Tim. It was like being in a playground. Sometimes working with Tim is like that. We're feeling it's like a couple of kids. It's like, let's just do anything. And that was particularly fun. And also seeing an underdog film that everybody thinks is going to die find an audience and do well. Such an unusual project like that felt really good. But there were moments in Batman that I felt like I was doing my best work. Writing the romantic theme in Dick Tracy was really, really fun for me because I'd never really done that before. Darkman, the score that I just finished, I really think is, at the moment, my favorite. Sam Raimi, the director, has long, wonderful sequences with no dialogue, And for the first time, I was able to write 5-6 minute stretches with absolutely no competition. There's one piece that's about 6 minutes, and